My name's Ed Drewitt, and I've been studying urban peregrines for the last 22 years. And I'm author of this book here, Urban Peregrines. And certainly since around about 2014, the Salisbury Peregrines have become a really important part of both the story of Salisbury, but also my own life as well. Now, the fabulous thing about Salisbury Cathedral is that it's got some of the earliest records of peregrines actually using a building really in Britain, and they go back to sort of the mid 1800s or so. But it's only been really in the last 20, 25, maybe 30 years or so that peregrines have really started to use buildings. And what I'm going to do over the next 20, 25 minutes or so is tell you a little bit about that story, but particularly relating it to the Salisbury Cathedral and the birds that actually live there. So if we sort of just go back in time a little bit and go back to the 1950s, 1960s, peregrines were very rare. They had been going through many, many years of persecution. They were shot during the Second World War as part of the Ministry of Air Defence to stop them interfering with carrier pigeons that were taking important messages during the war. And then unfortunately, they succumbed to chemical pesticides that were being used in the countryside, DDT in particular. When this was realised that it was causing peregrines to basically disappear, they were laying eggs, particularly that were breaking under the weight of their own bodies and also dying themselves. When this was realised, it was banned during the 1960s, 70s banned, and then by the 1980s, peregrines started to recover. So as we got into the 1990s, peregrines were increasing in number, and they were starting to return back to former haunts, particularly coastal sites. They like to nest on coastal cliffs. Then they started to come into inland quarries. And when we then got to the late 90s, they were coming back to buildings, for example, in cities such as Brighton and Bristol. And what's happened really since the 1990s is that they've taken up lots of different locations, and a lot of those locations now for nesting have become saturated. So the next step was for them to come into urban areas. And that's where Salisbury comes in, because although Salisbury's got a long history of peregrines going back to the mid-1800s, it's only really been in the last sort of 10, 15 years or so that they've really been showing an interest in the cathedral. A box was put up, a suitable box was put up with substrates, sort of gravel, and it's since then that the peregrines have nested. So my relationship with the peregrines in Salisbury has been very much working with Salisbury Cathedral and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds to give some advice about the box that was needed, the substrate that was needed. But to be honest, really, the birds have done it themselves. All they needed really was a fabulous place to actually be able to lay their eggs onto. So the reason that the substrate and gravel is really important is that if peregrines just lay straight onto lead roofing or any flat roofing, their eggs can roll into the gutter and often not hatch. So although buildings are fabulous places for peregrines, unlike a natural cliff on a coast or an inland quarry, buildings like Salisbury Cathedral don't necessarily have the right kind of flooring for them. So we have to provide that for them. So as soon as we had a box for them, as soon as we had this substrate, the Salisbury peregrines were able to lay eggs. And since 2014, I've actually been involved with putting rings on the chicks that have actually fledged at Salisbury Cathedral. So the wonderful thing about the birds at Salisbury Cathedral is that they're in a very accessible place for us. It's locked away. It's a place that people can't easily access if you're a member of the public, but under a special Schedule 1 license, which is a license that I hold that allows me to go near a peregrine nest, we can access the nest. And actually, when the chicks are around 3 weeks old, we can put some rings on their legs. So I've got some to show you. First of all, we put on a special metal ring. So if I show you here, this is a list of them here. We take one of these off and we put this onto the right leg of the peregrine chick. Now, this is a ring that's issued by the British Trust for Ornithology. Has a unique number on it, and it's a ring that we have to put on the birds. We have to put that on the chicks. And if they get found dead, whatever happens, that ring should still be on the right leg of the bird. But to help us identify these birds in the field from a distance, we also put on these blue colour rings. Here's a sort of necklace of them just here. And again, we take one of these off and fit it on the left leg of the bird. And these are brilliant. They're made out of a plastic. They've got 2 layers, and you've then got the actual letters there. And these are put on the left leg of the bird, and they mean that also if the bird is found dead, they can be spotted. But the great thing about the blue colouring is that from a distance, the birds can be seen without having to be recaught. So people might photograph the peregrines. They may see it through binoculars or a telescope, and they get reported then back to myself or maybe the cathedral, or more often straight through to the British Trust for Ornithology when we then hear about them. And from that, we actually have some really nice stories. So what I want to do is explore some of those stories that we've heard about. So since 2014 now, we've ringed quite a number of different chicks. Usually they've had 3 or 4 chicks in each year, so you add that up to quite a few chicks. So since we started in 2014, it usually takes a few years for us to actually, or members of the public, to spot these chicks. So, for example, in 2016, there was one of the chicks was rescued actually in very windy weather. I think it managed to get grounded. We knew it was one of our chicks because it had the blue colouring on it. It was actually put back up high and safely rescued. And then in January 2017, we heard from one of our first chicks that we ringed, actually, Aveline. And she had the ring SC put on there, SC for Salisbury Cathedral. And she was recovered about 81 miles away near Milton Keynes. She was actually recovered on a floodplain forest nature reserve, so a wetland, where there would be ducks and wading birds and plenty of food, gulls, for example, for her to eat. So she's a great example of where she was ringed sort of 2014 or so and found several years later. And what peregrines tend to do is they disperse in their first year or two, and after they're about 2 or 3 years old, they're likely to be in the place where they're actually going to be nesting and breeding. So another bird that we can talk about is Peter. He was one of our original birds that we ringed in 2014. He had the colouring GX put on his left leg, and sadly he was found injured. Actually, he'd been illegally shot. It's illegal to shoot any bird of prey, and he was found injured, but actually he survived that injury, that shot injury. He was released back into Hampshire, and he now successfully rears chicks every year at a particular confidential location. So he's a really nice example of success story. We know where he originated from as a chick, and we now know where he is actually breeding as a male bird. They don't always survive. Back in January, we heard from one of our peregrine chicks called Pansy, and sadly, we ringed her last year in 2019, and sadly this year she'd actually hit a window at a primary school in Pitton, so not too far away from Salisbury. But probably one of our more famous birds actually is Sally, and she was, or still is, we hope, an adult peregrine that we ringed and actually put a GPS tag on in 2017, thanks to BBC Springwatch. And she was an adult peregrine. She was rearing chicks with her partner, Sebastian. And what's really interesting about Sally is that because we had this special tag put on her back that gives out a signal to a mobile network, we were able to follow her around. So we knew where she was kind of roosting and resting, and she tends to like using pylons, a particular quarry. She's also been up towards Stonehenge on occasion. But what's very interesting is that we sort of first saw her, met her on Springwatch in 2017. And in 2018, her mate Sebastian wasn't actually there. We presume that he died. And then, so she was kind of on site at Salisbury Cathedral with no male. And actually another pair turned up. And I've got the date here. I think it was on the 23rd of April. She actually had a really fierce battle with a new female peregrine, to the point that they were actually sort of interlocked with their talons on the ground, on the balcony. And on this occasion, Sally actually won. So although she didn't have a male with her, she was actually basically, really looking after Salisbury Cathedral as her nesting site, perhaps in hope that she would find another male. As it happens, she didn't. And in 2019, another pair turned up, this time with a sort of young female that wasn't that experienced at all. And they also ended up in a fight, in a battle with Sally. And on this occasion, Sally didn't win. She stayed around the cathedral. She didn't go too far away, but she didn't win. And that pair actually did breed. So the chicks we had last year weren't from Sally. They were from this new male and female. And we have had perhaps the same pair nesting this year. They're unringed, so we don't know exactly who they are, but they've been breeding again this year with the 4 chicks that we've got. So over the last 12 years that I've been colouring in peregrines, Salisbury Cathedral and the chicks have become a really important part of that story. I've had over 50 recoveries of colouringed birds, so that's where they've been respotted or maybe found dead at a later date. And from Salisbury now, we've had 4, 5, 6, maybe half a dozen, including Sally, kind of actual recoveries of birds. So they tell stories, but importantly for my work, what I do with peregrines is 2 things. I look at where they disperse to when they've left their nest, and I look at their diet. So the recoveries that we've had from the Salisbury peregrines have really helped inform me of what peregrines do when they leave their nests here in the West Country. So as I mentioned, an important part of my research has been to look at the dispersal of peregrines, where they go once they leave their nest. And the Salisbury peregrines have been a really important part of that story. And they've helped me to understand that peregrines here in the West Country tend to head in a sort of north-northeast direction away from the west. And it's the females that tend to travel the furthest distances. So a young male that hatches from Salisbury Cathedral is actually only likely, it's probably going to stay in Wiltshire. He's probably going to go no more than maybe 20 or 30 kilometres. And he will set up a territory, and a female will go around, travelling around, looking for a male and looking for his territory. So the females that hatch from Salisbury Cathedral, we know, will tend to head in a northeast direction away from here, and they'll be looking for male peregrines that have set up a territory in a quarry, or most likely another urban area. So we know that a female peregrine that's hatched from Salisbury Cathedral will go on to actually nest in another building location, or she's most likely to do that. So I am very hopeful really that we will hear from future urban peregrines from Salisbury, and that we will actually find them at other urban locations across more northern and eastern parts of England. Now, another part of the peregrine story that Salisbury Cathedral really contributes to is looking at what peregrines eat. Now, if you speak to people about peregrines and their diet, it's often assumed that they just eat pigeons. They are our fastest bird of prey in the world. They can reach speeds of 200, 250 miles per hour in what we call a stoop dive, when they put their wings back and they drop through the air like a bullet to catch their prey. Now, they have lots of different ways of catching prey. The stoop dive is just one of them. Other times they might just simply line up with their birds and catch them. They might fly very low over fields and watery areas and catch their prey. And they're very much a bird-eating specialist. Occasionally they take the odd squirrel or rat or bat, but generally they're eating birds. So Salisbury Cathedral is fabulous because you've got cameras on the birds. When we go and ring the chicks, we can actually pick up some of the feathers that they've been eating. So over the last 22 years, I've been very much looking at what urban dwelling peregrines are eating. And it certainly isn't just pigeons. We know during the breeding season that pigeons are important, but throughout the year, they comprise around about 30 to 50% of the diet. So they're still, as a single animal, a single species, an important part of what urban peregrines eat. But there's still another sort of 2/3 to half that comprises a whole manner of different prey items: woodland birds, water birds, lots of different things really, migrant birds that are coming here for the winter or coming here for the spring and summer. And what's been really interesting actually about the pair that live here at Salisbury Cathedral is their love of black-headed gulls. So black-headed gulls are a sort of medium-sized to small gull that visits Salisbury during the winter time, usually between July and March time. And throughout last autumn, the current pair were eating lots and lots of them. So you'll find this, if you ever speak to a falconer, they will often tell you that their peregrines specialise on a certain bird, like a rook, for example, or crows or ducks or pheasants. So the pair here at Salisbury Cathedral really like the black-headed gulls during the winter season. But actually, over the last number of weeks or so, the peregrines in Salisbury have been feeding a whole manner of different prey. Certainly feral pigeons, certainly starlings, particularly when the young starlings leave the nest. They've also been feeding on young rooks and jackdaws, but also lots of different small birds as well, like chaffinches, for example, and swifts. And in recent weeks, they've even taken a hawfinch, which is a more unusual bird. And so Salisbury Cathedral, the prey that they're eating is contributing towards my diet studies, really. I've got people recording prey at many different locations: Sutton, Kingston, Exeter, where else have we got? Leamington Spa, lots of different locations. And the idea is that Salisbury Cathedral is one of those samples that can help contribute towards actually looking at what we can say about urban peregrines, what they are actually eating, and how we can generalize and talk about what they're eating. The other really interesting thing about urban peregrines is that they hunt at night. So we know that places like Salisbury are lit up at night. There's lots of light going up into the night sky, and that is lighting up the bellies of migrating birds that also migrate and fly at night. And these are often secretive birds living in woodlands, reed beds, which don't tend to fly during the daytime, but fly at night to avoid predation. But we've invented the street lamp, lots of light going into the night sky. And so what peregrines do at somewhere like Salisbury Cathedral is they're hiding in the shadows, looking up into the night sky, and they then actually fly out and catch this prey, which is lit up by the street lamps, and bring it back to feed on and eat. And we know at Salisbury Cathedral that we find the remains of little grebe, water rail, woodcock, birds which we know migrate at night and are commonly found in the diet of urban peregrines, such as at Salisbury. So I'd like to just summarise up really about urban peregrines and how Salisbury Cathedral contributes. Over the last, well, since I've been involved with them now for 2012, 2014, sort of 6 to 8 years or so really, we've learned a lot about not just this pair, but many different birds. We haven't just got the same pair using Cathedral over the last sort of 8 to 10 years or so. We've got a number of different individuals moving in, moving out. And peregrines have, in effect, kind of divorces, really. So female peregrines might have 3 or 4 mates in her lifetime. Males might have 2 or 3 different mates and what have you. And so this pair really on the Cathedral are providing lots of fabulous information for me to be able to learn more about the birds, but also for us to be able to tell stories that hopefully you, as people watching these birds, can enjoy and find fascinating. But also, you know, if you do spot prey being brought in, you know, do let us know about that. It helps me to learn more about what the peregrines are eating. And also, when you're out and about spotting peregrines and other birds at nature reserves around Wiltshire, you know, do look out for peregrines. They're crow-sized birds with long pointy wings. They love wetland areas, pylons they love to perch on. And if you get binoculars or can take a photograph and it's colouring, you might well be able to zoom in and actually see what that colouring says. So I hope that our long-standing urban peregrines, really, Salisbury Cathedral with some of the earliest records of urban dwelling peregrines, continue to nest on the cathedral and really continue to entertain us, but also provide lots of scientific information that can contribute towards what we know about urban peregrines across the rest of Britain. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I hope that it's provided lots of information for you. And all I can do is encourage you really to keep watching these birds. By watching them, you'll also be learning just as much as I am about what makes these birds tick and why somewhere like Salisbury Cathedral is such a great place for them.